So I'm making these two end tables out of cherry. I'm going to start with some 8/4 cherry. We're going to begin making the legs. I went ahead and cut these down into 24-inch lengths. That's a little bit longer than our legs will be. And then over to the miter saw to cut those down. And I'm checking them for flatness here. We had some twist to that board, and most of it was at the one end that you can see there, and so we'll go ahead and set that piece aside. But I think we can use the rest of those. My joiner was 8 inches wide, so I went ahead and cut these pieces down to just under 8 inches. And then I went ahead and flattened the face for our glue joints to glue those into the blanks for our legs. Yeah, that joiner did move on me. We've been doing some work in the shop, and I didn't lock my feet down on that. So go ahead and check those to see how those are fitting together. And those look good, so we're going to go with that. And these are the pieces for the second blank. Those are just some marks I like to make sure that I don't use that end of the board. It had some checking there, and I just did not want to glue that up to where I'd be using that end. Then I spread my glue and put these in the clamps. Went ahead and clamped those up and let them sit overnight. Come back and get my tool belt. We'll take that out of the clamps. We'll scrape off a little bit of glue. I like to scrape that off before I send that through the joiner. Just don't want to nick any of my knives blades. And so we're running this outside face to get it nice and flat. A couple passes through the joiner usually does a great job. And then we took that flat edge up against the fence to run our edge. Also gives us a nice square corner. We'll go ahead and check that for squareness, and I like that. So those blanks that we've just glued up, we're going to take them over to the bandsaw and cut them into our blanks for our 4 legs. And then I took those over to the table saw to run those down to a little closer. It's just over 2.5 inches square at this point. And then I just wanted to trim both ends up. Give me square ends on both ends. They're still a little bit longer than the legs will be at this point. We'll cut those down later on. And then a couple of passes through the planer. We'll square those up to 2.5 inches square. And there we have our 8 blanks for our 2 tables. So taking a little time here to orient those and lay those out the way that I want them. Went ahead and marked that on the bottom so I could keep those where I wanted. I also took some time to mark out some mortises and some lines for some shoulders that we're going to cut around the legs for some shaping that we'll do later on. You can see those mortises that we have there, and a couple of mortises down towards the bottom. Now over to the mortise machine to cut those mortises. I ran those about 1 inch deep. We're going to cut some of that material away from the top of our legs, so the final mortises will be about 1/2 inch deep. And that will be plenty with some glue to hold those tables together. These are the mortises in the bottom of the legs for the bottom shelf. Used a 3/4 inch straight cutting bit and I went progressively deeper. The first one was really shallow just to avoid any more tear out. And then I ran those passes deeper until I got to 3/8 of an inch deep. And there's the pass for the final depth. And then I took it to the other side of the bit to do the other side of that mortise. Same steps on these, I progressively went deeper until I got to that depth of 3/8 of an inch. And then some chisel work to square those up. A nice sharp chisel makes it easy work to clean those out. I went ahead and grabbed some more 4/4 cherry and laid out the boards to make my bottom shelves, as well as the aprons and the other pieces for the top of the tables. And then I cut those into lengths. I'm milling these boards up to do both shelves for the bottom of both tables. And then after we glue those up into a panel, we'll cut those into the separate shelves. I'll get that glued up and I'll set that aside to dry. And now we're back to working on our legs. And here I'm cutting some shoulders on the table saw that we'll use to help profile the legs. This one's around the top. Then I went ahead and set up the table saw. I lowered the blade just a little bit, as well as adjusted my fence to cut our next set of shoulders around the legs. And you'll see what we're going to do with those cut lines. And then I did cut these ones around the bottom. This is just below that bottom shelf. And now we'll go ahead and cut the shoulder that'll be just above the bottom shelf. And all those were at the same depth. And there we have our 8 blanks for our legs. So I spent a little time off camera here getting the table saw set up with the tensioning jig on there. And you can see I've got my blade tilted. It's tilted at 6 degrees, and I came up with that. What I did was I took my full-size template here, just clamped it into my tensioning jig, and then I just lined the blade up with the angle that we're going for, and I think we've got it pretty close there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we'll take the leg, we'll stick it in there, we'll push it through, and we'll cut all 4 sides that way to give us a squared off angled foot. We're going to go ahead and I've raised the blade to come clear up to our shoulder line here, and we'll cut up to there. And then after that's done, we're going to come back, we'll straighten out the blade back to 90, and we'll cut a little shoulder because I want to leave just a little bit of a shoulder for some trim that will go on later. So here we are cutting those. Not quite sure why I cut that one twice, but there you go. And we turn those around, cut all 4 sides. This is where I've straightened the blade back to 90, and we're cutting that shoulder that will get some trim pieces attached later on. And then back to the top of the leg, we're trimming the top down to its final dimensions. And that's where we'll leave those mortises a 1/2 inch deep. And some card scraping to smooth those out. And all I did here was just the sides with the mortises, so that I could glue those up later on. And then here I'm using the dado stack to remove some material around the center portion of the leg. I did that on all 4 sides as well. And then I just used that straight cutting bit on the router table to smooth that out. That gave me a smoother cut than the table saw did. Now we're back to some of our 4/4 cherry. I'm cutting up the pieces that I'll need for the aprons around the top of the table. These will have some tenons cut onto those to fit those mortises in the top of the legs. And these 2 narrow pieces will be the front part of the table where the drawer is. Went ahead and installed my dado and put on my sacrificial fence to make those tenons. With a little height adjustment to the dado blade, I'll cut the shoulders. Now we'll test fit those together just to make sure they fit good. Kind of get a first look at what our table will look like. Upside down, of course. Check it for square. And this is that glue up that we did that will be the bottom shelves. So I put that on the panel sled to square off one end. And then rip that through the table saw to its final dimension. And then back onto the panel sled to cut them to length. And here at the bandsaw, I'm taking a notch out of each corner of those shelves. Those will fit into those mortises that we made at the bottom of the legs. And there's a test fit of that shelf. And there you go. Dry fit both of our tables together. I wanted to soften the look of those legs just a little bit, so I've taken it over to the belt sander and just rounded those just a little bit just to soften that look. And then a little glue in all the mortises and in the tenons, and we'll glue those up. Now we'll go ahead and remove those clamps. I think that was just about every clamp that I owned. There's a lot of components to make sure we had a nice tight fit. I'm checking it for square. And I went ahead and took the sander to smooth up the rest of those joints. And here I'm cutting some pieces to make the drawer slides. I used poplar for the internal components of the tables. I'm just making a little L-shaped slide. And I went ahead and attached those inside the table with some screws only. I didn't glue those in because I wanted to be able to remove those. That'll help us attach the top later. This is the guide for the top of the drawer so that it doesn't tip out when you open it. I used pocket screws on the back and a biscuit and glue on the front. And then those pieces on the side will be what we attach the tabletop to. I milled up some pieces for our drawers. That's out of poplar as well. And that's what we milled up for the top. We'll let those sit in the clamps and dry. So we'll go ahead and cut our components for our drawers. And here I'm running the dado for the drawer bottom. And then over to the dovetail jig. I usually dovetail the fronts to the sides of my drawers. So that's what I'm doing here. I like this jig because I can cut both sides of the joint in one operation. And it works really well. And that dado is in the back of the side. And that will accept the back of the drawer. And here we are cutting out the drawer bottoms out of some 1/4 inch plywood. And some glue in all the joints. I let the bottom of the drawer just float. I do not add any glue to those. And then we'll go ahead and clamp that up. And here's a little test fit, and it's pretty tight at this point, which is what I'm going for. Because after I make the drawer box, I want to size it and adjust the fit then at that point. And so I went ahead and just ran each side over the joiner and took off just a little bit of each side. And another test fit. And we like that much better. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the top, and I'm going to cut a piece off of each side. We're going to save those pieces and we will glue those onto the bottom of the blank, and that will give our top the appearance of being thicker, and we'll do that on all 4 edges. And so here I am cutting the edges off the other side of the blank. And then back to the panel sled to square up one side of the blank, and then we'll cut them to length. Okay, so off camera I've glued up some more cherry for our tops. I'm going to make them a little over 1.25 inches thick. And the way I did that was just by adding some material around the edges on the underside. And we're going to make our top 18 by 24. And I'm going to do something that I don't do very often, and that's breadboard edges. I'm going to put about a 2-inch breadboard edge on each edge. So we are going to, what I think I'm going to do is put a mortise into this edge and glue a tongue in. So I decided to create that mortise using the router table. I've got a 1/2 inch straight cutting router bit in there. And I'll just go ahead and increase the depth each time. As you can see, I got the tape on there to show me where the bit starts and stops. And then I just run from one layout line to the other. And I did that in several passes until I got to a 1-inch depth for the mortise. And then it was the same process on the breadboard ends. And this is the material I glued up to create the tenon. And you can see I've oriented that grain so that it matches the tabletop, so we won't have any cross grain situation to worry about there. And then I just went ahead and glued those into the table. A better way to do this would just be to mill that into the end of the table, but I cut my blanks a little short and didn't leave enough material to do that. And so that's why I've done this domino type process there. And so I've fit the breadboard ends here, and I'm just drilling the holes to attach those with pegs. I'll glue the center peg and glue a little bit of the tenon in the middle, but we'll let the outsides of those float, and that will allow the tabletop to expand and contract. And that's what I'm doing with this file here, is just widening those holes so that those dowels will have room to move. And then I just went ahead and fit that on there, glued the center dowel. And I'm putting a little bit of glue just at the tops of the other dowels just so that they won't fall out. I just want those to stay in. And trim those off with the flush trim saw. And sand them smooth. Now I went ahead and put a little bit of a profile, just a little bit of a bull nose around the tabletop. I used a 1/2 inch round over bit just to give it a slight profile. I did that along the top and bottom edges, and there it is, dry fit to the table. So I've got some walnut here, and I'm starting to make some trim pieces. We're going to make some little 1/4 inch thick pieces that will wrap around the legs in several spots, as well as around the top of the table, as you'll see me do here in just a little bit. And I'm putting the same round over profile on those, an 1/8 inch round over bit on each side to give us a little bowl nose on that. And here I've got some of that trim that I'm wrapping the drawer front with. That'll give us that little bit of a profile around the drawer. And I've cut those miters on the miter saw. Just a little bit of glue and some brads to go around the drawer. and just test fit that to see if we like the reveal. I've got about a 1/16 inch reveal around the drawer there. And here I've got some more of that trim that we're starting to wrap around the posts of the legs. And so you can see the effect that we're going there with just wrapping those around each of those legs. And then I went ahead and grabbed some more cherry, and we're milling up another piece of trim. We're going to use that, and we're going to stack that on top of the walnut trim that we made, just to add some more trim work to the pieces. And we'll apply that to all the same areas that we had the walnut, and there you can see all the legs are finished with those pieces, both the walnut and the cherry pieces. And that was just a cove piece with the cherry. And I'm going to go ahead and just fit the drawer fronts to the box and attach those with some screws from the inside. Now I'll go ahead and position the top to the base, and we'll attach that with some screws. And I've oblonged those holes that the screws went through so that the top could move with seasonal changes. And now we'll finish trimming out the top of the table. You can see I've wrapped that walnut around each side of the top portion of the table, and we'll go back to do the same thing with the cherry trim as well. Before we get to that cherry trim, I decided to go ahead and make an apron that I'm going to fit to the bottom side of the top. And so here I am setting the fence and the angle, and I'm just beveling some cherry. Just a tip that anytime I'm beveling boards and I get these little thin cutoffs like this, I like to save those because those are really good for filling gaps or cracks and stuff like that. You can put a little glue on there and push it in if you have a seam or something that you need to fix up. So I do usually tend to save those. And now back to profiling our apron pieces. Changing the fence setting as well as the angle of the blade. And we're just cutting off a little bit more so that it's easier for this next step. And I'm just going to take the sander to this with some 80 grit and round that profile over. With this alder and that sander, it goes pretty quick. And then I've got these templates to cut out the shape, to mark out the shape of the aprons, and we'll cut those out on the bandsaw. And after cutting those out on the bandsaw, we'll just smooth those up with the drum sander. It takes a little time to do this, but the drum sander and the bandsaw usually make pretty quick work of doing that. And this is some poplar that I've cut some notches out, and we'll just use this to attach that apron to the table. As you can see, we'll glue and nail that piece of poplar on the inside of the table there, and then we'll attach that apron to the piece of poplar with some pin nails. And there's that cherry trim that we talked about earlier. Finished wrapping that up around the top of the table. And there we have the finished table. All the trim work. And so off camera I went ahead and used some Rubio Monocoat as a finish. I know you guys have seen that applied before. Attach the drawer handle and we are finished. So there we have it. Thanks for watching my video. If you couldn't tell by now, this is my first video. A lot of learning experience there. But I do hope to put out some more videos. So if you liked it, go ahead and give this one a like. And if you want to subscribe to see more of my stuff, that would make me more than ecstatic as well. See you in the next video.